But we definitely heard a lot of people at the time mentioning Andy Burnham on the doorstep and talking about, so obviously early on he was blocked from running for this, and there seemed to be a fair push behind him. People would have voted for Andy Burnham if he was running. Do you think that would have had an effect on the result today?
I think it would have had some effect. And I think if we were looking at this as the polling going into yesterday was a lot tighter than the end result ended up being. I think if that's what the result would have panned out, I would have probably said, yeah, Labour would have probably won with Andy Burnham. Given the margin of victory that the Green Party had in the end, I'm actually not so sure, or it would have been probably closer than people expected. Andy Burnham is a popular mayor. People like, generally speaking, people like what he's done with the buses, bringing them back into public control. People see that there's been a growth in Manchester, and he's kind of been a figurehead for it. That a lot of the work has kind of been done, not just involving Andy Burnham, but he has been a figurehead for that.
What about you, Graham? Do you think there was ever a chance for a Labour win in Manchester here?
Oh, of course there was. And they would have done better, I'm pretty sure, with Andy Burnham. There's two problems with that. There's the nightmare scenario for Labour that they allow Andy Burnham to run and then lose Gorton and Denton and then lose the Greater Manchester mayoralty. Or, even Burnham wins Gorton and Denton and then they lose the mayoralty. That's a lose. Add to that, if you're Sir Keir Starmer and you're hanging on for dear life for your job, what you don't do is make it possible for your main perceived challenger to take over from you, who currently can't do that. So I think Labour were in an unenviable position. This was a by-election lost in Westminster rather than Manchester because of the party's just fairly overwhelming unpopularity at a national level. Whether, so we'll never know whether, letting Andy Burnham stand would have changed that. But there's the logic for not allowing him to stand was pretty overwhelming, I think.
So a lot of people over the last month have been saying this is a referendum on Starmer. Are you of that opinion then, Graham?
Yeah, as every by-election is, to a greater or less extent. There will be people who go out and will have voted because there's a pothole at the end of their street, but more often than not, people are voting on what the general political situation is, either consciously or unconsciously. There's a reason Labour lost in Runcorn and Helsby last year, and then in Caerphilly, in the Welsh Senate a few months after. And there's a reason why they've lost now. That they're doing very badly at a national level.
I think just as well to add to what Graham's just said there, and going back to the Andy Burnham point, I think had Andy Burnham been running, given that we know that the Green Party ended up with quite a comfortable win in the end, there's clearly so much anger against the way Labour's handling certain issues. I know the issue of Gaza is one that has been talked about in this campaign in particular as well. And that might just not have been enough to have seen Andy Burnham over the line. He might have been able to get a few extra votes, but it just might not have been enough for him. And it's the same on, the people who were supporting reform. There's a clear vote there for a change of direction in the country. Would Andy Burnham run in as the Labour candidate have changed anything? I just don't think we can really say now.
So Andy Burnham could have been a bit relieved waking up to those results this morning.
Possibly might have found himself an unemployed man this morning. Yeah. So,
well, it's interesting, isn't it, with the rise of sort of party politics we've seen in this by-election that with personality politics we've seen in this by-election, Matt Goodwin and Hannah Spencer have really sort of put themselves on a pedestal as very public figures all over social media. But it was that Labour vote with potentially a slightly less charismatic candidate or someone a bit less willing to put themselves forward on social media. And that came down to, at the end of the day, when people weren't seeing her face, it came down to Keir Starmer, I guess. Okay, so looking then to the national picture of things. So do we think this is symptomatic of bigger issues coming for Labour then? Does this mean that things aren't looking good for Starmer heading into the May elections?
Yeah, I think it's looking like really troublesome times for Keir Starmer, and it probably already was. I think various things that have gone on recently, obviously the Peter Mandelson scandal showed a few tensions in the Labour Party in Westminster, but it's hard to see how he pulls it around from this situation. You've got a set of May elections now where the Green Party can point to this result and say, you can give us our vote in these elections. We're a credible force, particularly in Greater Manchester now. There'll be a lot of seats probably in the city of Manchester that they previously might not have thought that they could have gone for, and maybe other parts of the region as well. And it's the same with Reform as well. Reform will point towards the support they were able to win, particularly in areas like Denton, and they'd probably be able to pull a similar trick as well. I'd expect to see both those parties chipping away at Labour's base in May, and I think that'll be really, really tough times for Starmer. It's difficult to see how long term he can survive that, and you kind of get into the point where the only case for Labour keeping Sir Keir Starmer is the fact that we've had so much upheaval in the last decade, the amount of prime ministers we had under the Conservatives, and it's probably just the idea that, do we want to go down the same path as that? That might be the argument that Labour end up having for keeping him in the end.
Yeah. What do you think, Graham? Do you think this is symptomatic of how things might play out coming into the May elections?
Absolutely. And, it almost certainly will be a very tough night for Labour. They've got a lot to lose. And significantly, some of those elections that are happening in the north and elsewhere aren't just the usual a third of councillors where you can't have that much change. There's a number of councils, I think about 20 in the north, where the whole council is running because of boundary changes. So places like Newcastle, Sunderland, Sheffield, they could flip entirely in one night. And we saw that last year in Lancashire, in County Durham, places that were run by one party are suddenly Reform dominated. The other big problem Labour have got, and they're fighting elections in May, don't forget, in Scotland and Wales, in London, and in English counties and in other areas. Those three by-elections I talked about, they've lost to three different parties. So who do you campaign against? You couldn't out-reform in Helsby. You couldn't out-Plaid Cymru in Caerphilly, and you've not been able to out-green the Greens last night. There's an option. They could just be themselves and stand for what they stand for and what they believe in, but that doesn't seem to have occurred to the party as yet.
And how do you think Farage will be feeling this morning? He's obviously someone that's been pretty bolstered at the announcement of these council elections and has been talking a big game. But this is obviously going to be a bit of a hit for him, isn't it?
Yeah, listen, they doubled their vote pretty much, but they went from second to second. And for a party that's way ahead in the national polls, that threw a lot at this, Nigel Farage was in the constituency quite a few times. That's got to be disappointing. And the other thing I think that these last two elections show, both in Caerphilly and here, it shows that in areas that are traditionally left-leaning, when they see the chance of a Reform MP, people seem to come out and vote and coalesce around a candidate, like a stop Reform candidate. Now, that doesn't mean that's going to happen across the country, and I don't think anything that happened last night doesn't mean Reform aren't still leading in the national polls. But he will be a little bit concerned that he's not managed to get somebody fairly high profile, probably a wrong candidate for this constituency, but that's another matter. They haven't got him over the line. And certainly you can see in there the reaction from both Nigel Farage and Matt Goodwin, to the result was a bit sour, to say the least. So that doesn't seem like a party who are happy with a second place.
Okay, well, thank you very much, guys. That was all super interesting. I'm sure there's plenty more to come throughout the day, so keep watching all of our coverage.